From KVUE News in Austin, you're watching Texas This Week with Ashley Goodo.
Good Sunday morning. Texas voters can start casting ballots early in the March primary election in just 2 days. One of, if not the biggest races for Democrats is towards the top of the ticket. 9 Democrats are running for U.S. Senate, hoping to take on Republican U.S. Senator Ted Cruz in November. Over the last several weeks, we've been talking to the candidates. This morning, we're hearing from the frontrunner in the race, U.S. Congressman Colin Allred. But first, here are the 3 things you need to know in Texas politics. Governor Greg Abbott announced Friday Texas is building a base for the Texas Military Department in Eagle Pass near the Texas-Mexico border. According to the governor, the base will be able to house 1,800 soldiers with the ability to expand to 2,300. He added there are 2 main goals: improve Texas National Guard soldiers' quality of life while they're serving on the border and to save money. The governor says right now many National Guard soldiers are staying in hotels and commute to the border from 50 miles away. During the past few years, multiple soldiers deployed to the border died by suicide. There were also reports of them not getting paid on time. The new military base camp will include living quarters for soldiers, plus recreation facilities and space for medical, psychological, and chaplaincy programs. State officials say they expect to have a 300-bed capacity at the base by mid-April. After that, they'll add an additional 300 beds every 30 days. A 9-year-old securities fraud case against Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton will go to trial. A district judge in Harris County rejected his team's attempt to throw it out Friday. The charges stem from fraud accusations that happened before Paxton became the AG. He's accused of soliciting investors for a tech company without telling them the company was paying him to promote its stock. His legal team argued the case should be thrown out because Paxton's constitutional right to a speedy trial had been violated. The trial is set to start in April. If convicted, Paxton faces up to 99 years in prison. The Department of Justice and State of Texas faced off in federal court on Thursday. The DOJ and others are suing Texas, trying to stop Senate Bill 4 from going into effect next month. The new law will allow law enforcement in Texas to arrest and deport people suspected of entering the state illegally. The federal judge hearing the case hinted at his ruling on the request for a temporary injunction, saying he will make a decision before the law is set to go into effect on March 5th to give the state time to appeal. 3-term Congressman Colin Allred has his sights set on the U.S. Senate. Right now, he's leading the pack in a crowded field of Democrats hoping to take on U.S. Senator Ted Cruz, who is expected to easily clinch the Republican Party's nomination during the primary election next month. This morning, we're sitting down with Representative Allred to learn more about where he stands on the issues. Right now, in the latest polls, it shows that you are leading over the other Democratic candidates. You have outraised Senator Ted Cruz in this race. Talk to us about why you think your message is resonating with voters.
Yeah, well, I think I have a story to tell about our state, about who we are. I was raised by a single mom in Dallas as a public school teacher. I went to Baylor and played football there. I trained for the draft in Houston. My family's from Brownsville. This state has shaped me. I'm a 4th-generation Texan. And I think we're not who Ted Cruz says we are. And I think a lot of folks feel that. And when they see some of the stuff that's been happening in Washington that he's doing, like when we have a border security deal that's struck to try and deal with some of the issues we're facing there, and he takes it down, not because of the policy, but because of the politics, folks don't like that. And so I think that's why they're looking for new leadership and fresh ideas.
9 Democrats running in this race, but there are some differences between you and the other front runner, particularly when it comes to health care. And health care is something that you've really shaped your campaign on. Talk to us about how you want to increase access to health care to more people, especially given the fact that Texas has the highest uninsured rate in the country.
That's right. Well, my first act in Congress was protecting the Affordable Care Act in court to make sure that the Trump administration couldn't get rid of it. And of course, Ted Cruz shut down the government in 2013 to try and repeal the ACA and go back to the days where if you had a pre-existing condition, you could be discriminated against, or lifetime caps. We can't go back to that. But it's unacceptable what we have in our state. When we have the highest uninsured rate in the country, where I'm from in Dallas County, we have over 20% of folks who are uninsured. And it's unsustainable. We're seeing rural hospitals closing down because of this. We know what the health impacts are when folks don't have access to care. So I've tried everything I can to go around our state who won't expand Medicaid, to make the ACA work better, to lower costs, and particularly to control prescription drug costs. And I'm proud that we've capped insulin for folks who are on Medicare at $35 a month. The only reason we couldn't do that for everybody was because Ted Cruz voted against it in the Senate. So we have to keep expanding coverage and lowering costs. And in particular, right now, we have to restore the right for women to make their own decisions about their body, including access to an abortion.
You know, another policy area where there are some differences between you and the other candidates in the primary is the border. And you particularly raised a lot of eyebrows last month when you voted for a resolution to condemn the Biden administration's handling of the border right now. You received pushback on both sides, from both the other candidates in this race as well as from Ted Cruz, who says you were flip-flopping. Talk to us about that decision.
Yeah, well, my family's from Brownsville. My grandfather was a customs officer after serving the Navy in the Pacific in World War II. So my mom, my aunt grew up, that's where I spent a lot of my summers visiting my grandmother. And I know that our border communities are real places where folks are trying to raise their families, and they deserve support. And when we are having record numbers of migrants showing up, which in December it was the most we've ever experienced in a single month, that is a huge burden on those communities. And so when we don't act at the federal level, that burden falls on those communities, and it also creates a vacuum that folks like Governor Abbott step into and do things that I think are inconsistent with our values. And so what I was really saying there is I think the status quo is unacceptable, and that we need to be much more aggressive in terms of trying to respond to this crisis and find solutions. And I've been saying this for some time. For folks who are in Washington who know what my interactions had been, they'll say it wasn't that big of a surprise. And I was joined in that by a couple of my Democratic colleagues who also represent border communities, who I think also were trying to send the same message, that it's time for us to get very serious about this. And that's why when you see the border deal that did come together in the Senate to try and address these issues, when you see that fall apart only because folks like Ted Cruz want to have the problem to run on in November, that's when you know something's really broken, because we have to address this for Texans, and not for partisan reasons, but so that our fellow Texans can have a solution.
When we look at what else was included in that bill, it also had money for Ukraine, money for Israel. Obviously, what's happening in Israel, what's happening there is a very controversial issue. I want you to talk to us about where you stand and particularly your thoughts on the calls for a ceasefire.
Yeah. Well, I want a negotiated ceasefire with conditions, and those conditions have to be that the over 100 hostages that Hamas is still holding are released. That's what Secretary Blinken was just in the Middle East for a week trying to negotiate a deal to do this. And also one that sees Hamas lay down their arms and no longer have the capacity to conduct an attack on Israel like they did on October 7th, which was the deadliest day for Jews since the Holocaust. They killed over 1,200 Israelis. They took over 200 hostages. And it was, I think, an incredibly shocking and horrific moment. Now, I do think that the conduct of the war has at times been something that I disagree with. My goal throughout this has been to provide as much humanitarian aid as possible, which is also in the package that failed and that hopefully is going to come back in a different form, humanitarian aid for innocent Palestinians in Gaza. But the role I think we can most productively play is making sure and shaping what comes next for Gaza and for Palestinians and for Israelis. Because to me, it's just more clear than ever that we have to have a two-state solution here, in which we have a peaceful and independent Palestinian state next to a democratic, Jewish, and secure Israeli state. That has to be the end goal. And so this is, in some ways, this crisis has, I think, revived that conversation.
If we're looking at your road to the Senate, there was a recent poll that showed some promising numbers, I would say, for you as a Democrat in a potential matchup between you and Senator Cruz. But the reality is a Democrat has not won a statewide election in Texas in decades. Why do you think it would be different this time?
Yeah. Well, it's too early for polls because, I'm still introducing myself to Texans, and I want to, say that. But
the poll was promising. It had you at 40 to 42.
I'm just saying. I think it's all a little bit, do you know who the folks are? Even?
Sure.
But the fact of the matter is, I've done this before. I beat a 22-year incumbent Republican to get into Congress, who actually, there had been no Democrat on the ballot the last time, the election before that, because everybody thought he was so unbeatable, right? I remember when 538 gave me something like a 10% chance to win that election about 6 weeks out. Nobody thought we were going to win that seat, and we won by nearly 7 points. And so I've shown that we can win in tough races. I had a tough re-election. But I think it's also just true that as a state, we're ready for this, and that we can't afford 6 more years of Ted Cruz misrepresenting us in the United States Senate. We can't have a senator who, when 30 million Texans are freezing in the dark, decides to go on vacation to Cancun. We can't have a senator who says that the border is the biggest issue of all the issues in the country, but then when we have a solution to it, says, well, I don't want to deal with it because I want the politics of the problem. We can't have a senator who wants to have a nationwide ban on abortion. This is all inconsistent with who we are as Texans. And so we have to stand up together as Texans in this election. Because to me, this will be less about who Ted Cruz is and more about who we are. And I think I know who we are, and I think we're going to make the right decision in November.
Remember, early voting starts Tuesday, February 20th. If you're eligible to vote by mail, you can request your ballot now. Just know that request has to be received by Friday, February 23rd. Early voting ends March 1st, and Election Day is March 5th. That's Texas This Week.